Thanks for listening to the Film Florida podcast. If you have a minute, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Thanks, and we appreciate your support. Welcome to the Film Florida podcast. My name is John Lux, and I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida. Today, our guest is Nina Streich, Executive Director of the Global Peace Film Festival. Thank you for joining us on the podcast today, Nina.
Delighted to be joining you, John.
So I like to start the podcast with a bit of an origin story, a backstory. How did you get your start in the industry?
Well, I've always been a film lover, and I've always loved anything on screens. And my mother said when I was very young, she said that when I won awards, she would say that from the first time I saw a screen, I was magnetically attracted to it. My father was actually in the business, and I used to gopher in his studio. He directed television commercials. And by the time I was 15 years old, I thought I was too old to work for Daddy. And so I got a job as an apprentice in a cutting room in my school vacations and started from there. And I worked my way up through the cutting room. By the time I was 24 years old, I was editing trailers for a boutique trailer company in New York called Block Film Company, and was cutting trailers for major motion pictures. So the first film that I handled the whole campaign for as the editor was American Gigolo. And from then, I worked on over 50 major studio films, and then started getting into cutting trailers for independent films. I was also always involved with social issues as an activist, and eventually that led me into electoral politics, and eventually in the late 80s, I worked on the campaign for Mayor David Dinkins in New York. And after he was elected, I was appointed Deputy Film Commissioner for New York City. When I finished that job, which I absolutely loved, I just sort of stumbled into becoming the development director for the Nantucket Film Festival, and that led me to be the development director for the Newport International Film Festival, and I was basically sort of dove into the film festival world. And eventually, about 10 years later, was hired to create the Global Peace Film Festival. That was in 2003.
Let's talk more about the Global Peace Film Festival. As you mentioned, it started in 2003. Talk about the vision for the film festival and why it was started back then.
Well, in 2003 was the year that the war in Iraq started, and the person whose idea it was a businessman who had business interests in Orlando at the time, and he was a devout Muslim. He was also a conservative Republican, and he wanted to do something charitable that basically expressed the fact that Islam is a religion of peace and how much he, as a Muslim, was against the war. And he was interviewing people. I was probably the 20th or 20-somethingth person he interviewed. And what interested him in my resume was the fact that I had been the New York City Film Commissioner and was involved in city government and had that background. I had basically free rein to create what I wanted with the festival, knowing that the idea of the festival was around the Iraq War, but my thinking was that is too limiting, and rather than doing something about anti-war, my vision was to create something that showed a vision of what does peace look like. So I wanted to be much more expansive. I wanted to define peace not in relation to war, but in relation to each and every one of us and how we as human beings desire peace and prosperity, peace and justice, peace in a much broader context than most people would normally think of it. And what I really wanted to do was create this positive vision as opposed to an anti-this or anti-that vision. So that allowed us to be much more expansive in what we looked for in films. And in fact, one year, probably one of the early years of the festival, maybe 2006 or 2007, when a lot of the films about the Iraq War were coming out, one of the local film writers in Orlando when I was giving him the films to look at for his review of the festival. He was like, but you didn't give me anything about the Iraq War, and everybody else is giving me something about the Iraq War and Global Peace Film Festival. Surely you would be the one I would expect to see that from. And I was thrilled when he said that, because that's exactly what I wanted to achieve. Not that we ignored the Iraq War or issues around, films about it or around it. My idea was a positive one, what can you do in your life to make your world a better place, whether that's just your family or in your community or in relation to a conflict that's going on. But how do you take that vision and make something positive out of it? How do you inspire audiences by what you're doing rather than make people leave the theater holding their heads going, oh gosh, everything's so awful. So we very much look for films that have that kind of inspiration, somebody who's been striving to achieve something in relation to a very broad definition of peace. That was my original vision for the festival, and that's sort of how we've evolved it. As it's evolved, what we've really looked to is collaboration with organizations and individuals locally who are doing something positive themselves, so that if we see a film about something relating to one of the local organizations that we work with, and this includes everything from the League of Women Voters to the Farm Worker Association of Florida to the LGBT Center in Orlando, to just a broad cross-section. So if we see something that relates to something that they're working on, we'll talk to them about it in advance so that when we show the film, and you know how when you see a film that's sort of inspiring and it's about somebody doing something, you lean forward in your seat and you say, what can I wish there was something I could do. Well, we want to provide that answer. Here's something you can do. Here's a petition you can sign. Here's a letter you can write to somebody, whether it's a letter to an editor or a letter to an elected official, or a river cleanup that you can participate in with a local environmental organization, a river or beach cleanup. We want that audience member who didn't know where to turn with that. We want to give them that opportunity to do something. And then that also helps, strengthen our relationships with the community organizations, and also helps the filmmakers who made their films because they feel passionately about the issues about which they've made their film, and it helps them know that their film has made the impact that was the reason for their making it in the first place.
Now, you had talked about how the film festival has evolved through the years through building relationships with different groups. What are some of the new relationships you guys are building and some of the new evolution of the organization?
Some of the ways that we've evolved has been in the services that we provide beyond just the film festival itself. And this is both for filmmakers and for the organizations. Mostly we show documentaries. We love to include narrative features and narrative shorts in the program as well, but it's not as easy to fit them into our program. So primarily I'm talking about documentaries. Filmmakers will make their films so that they can reach the audience they want to inspire or engage with what the film is about. So we have started to provide two different services for filmmakers. One, we've been able to provide fiscal sponsorship for primarily documentary films, which allows a filmmaker or somebody who works in a professional area of the business and decides for their personal passion they want to make a film about something that's related to our mission. We can offer them fiscal sponsorship. We can offer to provide them fiscal sponsorship services, which means that we provide them a vehicle to raise money through grants and through tax-deductible donations. We make sure that everything that they're doing conforms to IRS regulations so that the grant money and individual donations that they get are actually for the charitable purposes as defined by our 501c3 status. We also provide consulting services regarding the impact campaigns of a film, because some films that are made are not going to be theatrically distributed, but distribution changes so much all the time. But the filmmaker has to find their audience, whether it's online, through streaming, but how do you reach that audience, and how do you define the audience that you want to reach? And that's a service that we can provide so that the film that the documentarian has made can achieve the goals that the filmmaker has wanted to make when they started making the film. So we've been providing that as well. And a new program that we just started last year, there's a new event in Orlando called Fusion Fest, actually Orange County, called Fusion Fest. It takes place in downtown Orlando over Thanksgiving weekend. Took place for the first time in 2018. Fusion Fest is a celebration of the different cultures that make up the residents of Central Florida. People have come from all over the world to settle in Central Florida, and Fusion Fest is a way to celebrate that through all the different arts and cultures. It includes food and fashion, spoken word and music, and film. I was approached by Terry Olson, who's the arts and culture guy for Orange County. He asked me how could we present something in film, and I suggested a short film contest that basically 3 to 5 minute short films about an individual or a family who's come here from another part of the world or another part of the country. So we did that last year for the first time, and it was very successful. We had over 20 submissions, even though nobody'd heard about it before, and they were all presented at Fusion Fest. Actually, they were all presented in the Global Peace Film Festival first, and we had an audience award during the festival, and a jury watched all the films, and the jury winner was awarded at Fusion Fest. So it was actually a $1,000 cash prize, a scholarship valued at $1,000 for the top student film. So where Fusion Fest was successful last November, and so is going to happen again this November and hopefully grow over the years. And we're doing another short film contest this year. Sometime at the end of August, we'll be doing the contest. This year we're doing it as a 48-hour film contest where we'll have an array of subjects from around the world and pair them with filmmakers, and we'll be on the specific day, it'll be a Friday early evening. Everybody will come together. The filmmakers will be there. The subjects will come with photos and videos and items from their heritage that they want to express in the film. And we'll have a drawing. And this, filmmaker number one will be paired with somebody that's picked out of the hat. And then they'll have till Sunday night to finish their film. Those films will be shown twice in the Global Peace Film Festival, and then again over the weekend at Fusion Fest over Thanksgiving weekend. So we'll be looking for filmmakers. Hope listeners of this podcast will be interested in doing that, and they can just email our info site, which is info@peacefilmfest.org, for more information and to sign up. So that's another of our new programs. And it was tremendously successful the first year, even though we sort of it was a last-minute initiative, and we think it can really grow, and I'm very excited about it.
So, Nina, the Global Peace Film Festival is every year in September in Central Florida. Is that correct?
Yes. Basically, the International Day of Peace is September 21st, and that's our sort of anchor date for the festival. So we run essentially Monday through Sunday. Monday, we do a kindergarten through 12th grade art exhibit through the Orange County Public School System, and Monday is the opening of that. Our opening night film is at Enzian Theater on the Tuesday evening, and then on Wednesday we start the full program, and that runs Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. This year, 2019, September 21st, the International Day of Peace, is on Saturday. So we anchor the festival so that it falls in that week.
And the submission window is traditionally January through May, is that correct?
Yeah, submissions are already open. So we are looking for submissions. There are a diversity of subjects that we look for submissions, The very final submission deadline is May 21st. The early bird deadline is in March, March 12th, and then submissions go from right now till May 21st.
And what are some of the traditional categories that you guys receive films for?
We accept narrative features, narrative documentaries, animated films, both feature and short films, narrative or documentaries. And some of the issues, and this is not a finite list, is global peace and activism, conflict resolution, social inequality, class, race, gender, mobility, age, etc. So we actually do quite a lot of films about differing abilities. So we've had films about autism, we've had films about elder care, we've had films about people facing paralysis and how they overcome their circumstances, LGBTQ+, Me Too and women's rights, interfaith philosophy, religious tolerance, environment and environmental justice. Environment is a big issue for us because it's so important to everybody. In fact, in 2017, the festival took place literally the week after Hurricane Irma, and we had a fairly substantial environmental program that year, so it was made more current by the fact that a lot of people were still dealing with getting their power back on, including a lot of our staff people still didn't have power during the festival, but fortunately our venues did. Climate change, sustainable energy, economic policy, fair trade, new business models, food and water security and related issues, aging, music and the arts, human trafficking, community mediation, youth as change agents. We love comedy films or satirical films. People think global peace, it's fairly serious. Well, it doesn't have to be. There's a lot of humor, and humor is great, so we love comedies. Sports and recreation. We've had some wonderful films about sports and peace. One film I remember from many years ago was called Make Goals, Not War, about soccer. We've had films about cricket. We've had films about all kinds of different sports. So those are some of the issues. Those are by no means exclusive.
And you had mentioned earlier that you really try and have it be positive messages, but how challenging is that when in this day and age it's very easy to go negative? I mean, we see that every day, but you obviously want to stay positive in nature. How much of a challenge is that? It's
not really that much of a challenge, but also different people interpret things very differently. We had a film, for instance, a film that I absolutely love called Pray the Devil Back to Hell, about the women's movement in Liberia and how the women's movement actually brought about change in Liberia, political change in Liberia when there was a civil war there. And basically the women triumphed a few years after, but I forget, 3 or 4 years after the film came out. Lema Bowie, one of the main subjects in the film, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for her leadership in that struggle. The impact of what those women did, and this was not in the film, but led to the first woman president of an African country, in Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. So to me, the film was incredibly inspiring and empowering because of these brave women who'd overcome so much. And I spoke to several people who were like, "Oh, that's so sad." And I'm like, "What's so sad about it? They won. You know, they ended the Civil War." And she said, "But there was war." And so to me it was very positive, but to some other people in the audience, they found it sad. So you never know how different people interpret things, what people see in something. But our goal is to basically tell people in the audience that you can make a difference.
So mark your calendars for September 16th through 22nd for the Global Peace Film Festival, and the Fusion Fest is Thanksgiving weekend. That'll do it for this episode of the Film Florida podcast. Thanks to Nina Streich for joining us, and thank you for listening. To learn more about the Global Peace Film Festival, visit peacefilmfest.org. You can also sign up for a newsletter there or send them an email to get more information at info@peacefilmfest.org. And of course, they're on Facebook and Twitter as well. And for more information about Film Florida, go to filmflorida.org or visit our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And of course, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast.